Welcome to Cure America, and we have our esteemed panel here with us today. But before we have our opening discussion, we're going to have an interview with Dr. Brian Blase of Paragon Health Institute to discuss the insights and some of the money laundering that's going on in our Medicaid program. And it should be a very lively discussion, and then we'll get back to our panel and continue our dialogue. And we have a very special guest here with us today to help us understand the current debate that is taking place in Congress regarding Medicaid health insurance program. Medicaid was originally intended to be an insurance program, correct? For low income and disabled Americans, but has evolved over time, particularly with the passage of so-called the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. Dr. Brian Blase is the president of Paragon Health, of the Paragon Health Institute. Brian was special assistant to the president for economic policy at the White House National Economic Council, also known as NEC, from 2017 to 2019. Where he coordinated the development and execution of numerous health policies, advised President Trump, the NEC director, and also other senior officials. After leaving the White House, Brian founded Blase Policy Strategies and served as its CEO. Brian previously guided the White House Committee on Oversight and Government Reforms of Healthcare and Entitlement Programs Oversight and Investigation efforts from 2011 to 2014, and then served as the Senate Republican Policy Committee's Health Policy Analyst from 2014 to 2015. I am very pleased to welcome Brian to Cure America today. And we look forward to hearing his very informed, as you can tell, insight about Medicaid and related issues. Brian, you and Paragon Institute, a Paragon Institute colleague, I have it here in my notes. You recently wrote a report addressing, and the title of the report is Addressing Medicaid Money Laundering. That's an interesting title. And then the subtitle is The Lack of Integrity with Medicaid Financing and the Need for Reform. That sounds like a pretty strong indictment on the Medicaid program. How is money laundering taking place with the Medicaid program?
Yeah, so,
and how can we stop it?
Donald, thanks for having me on. There's two main problems with the Medicaid program. They result from the fact that the federal government provides an open-ended reimbursement of state Medicaid expenditures. But one of the issues is states don't actually have to come up with real Medicaid expenditures. They can create accounting gimmicks that give the appearance of an expenditure and then get federal revenue for the accounting gimmick. So let me give you an example. Providers, big hospital systems, actually put these in place. They go to the state and they say, what we want, state, is for you to tax us $1 million. So the state taxes the provider $1 million, gets that revenue, and then spends it right back on that provider in a Medicaid payment. Most people would say, well, that's just an accounting gimmick. It's $1 million changing hands. But then the state submits that bill to the federal government and gets a reimbursement. The average reimbursement rate is about 70%. So that $1 million accounting gimmick has turned into $700,000 of real funds that the state gets from the federal government. So it really reduces the integrity of this program. And that, along with Obamacare, and Obamacare plays into it, actually amplifies the money laundering. Obamacare created a new class of Medicaid enrollees. So in your intro, you said it was originally a program for people with disabilities, low-income children, pregnant women. Obamacare added a whole bunch of able-bodied working-age adults on the program, and the federal government reimburses them at a much higher rate than those original intended recipients.
Okay, stop for a minute. I don't mean to interrupt you,
Yep.
but you're saying able-bodied Americans are getting more reimbursement. The state is getting more reimbursement for them than the people that was really intended for.
Yes, the program currently discriminates against the most vulnerable. So on average, the federal government reimburses about 60% of the expense for children, pregnant women, individuals with disabilities. The federal government reimburses 90% for able-bodied working-age adults. And we know that has had negative outcomes for those traditional recipients. It's harder for them to get doctor's appointments. States have taken resources away from children, away from people with disabilities, to spend them on this able-bodied working-age population that Obamacare brought in.
So the group that it was originally intended to help is actually being discriminated against for able-bodied working adults. So 2 questions. 1, how long has the money laundering been going on? And 2, how do we get the able-bodied adults off of Medicaid?
Money laundering has been going on a long time.
Okay.
So states have incentives because of the open-ended reimbursement to commit this Medicaid money laundering. It really goes back 4 decades, and Congress has come in at various points in time to try to crack down on the money laundering, but it has exploded over the past 5 years. The Biden administration really enabled a lot of these financing schemes. So Medicaid, the federal Medicaid spending increased. If you look over the next decade, it's projected to be $1.2 trillion higher than it was at the start of the Biden administration. And so states are now designing these money laundering schemes to pay hospitals, to pay insurers, because insurers get a cut of all this money, much more than the Medicare program pays for seniors on that program. So we're also, not only is current Medicaid policy discriminating against the most vulnerable, but we're hurting seniors on Medicare because Medicaid is now, because of many of these financing schemes, a better payer. To get your question on the able-bodied working age adults, I'm going to give you a statistic that I find frightening. There's actually twice as many Americans on Medicaid as reside under the poverty line. So the program is not anymore just for the poor. We now have twice as many Americans on Medicaid. Now, part of that is because states aren't doing proper eligibility reviews because of all the federal money that they get from having more enrollees on the program. But the tremendous growth in the program has all been on this able-bodied working age population. And we don't want them on welfare, right? They should not be on a welfare program. The welfare program, the safety net, should be about ensuring health care access for low-income seniors, pregnant women, kids, people with disabilities. They should move to employer-based coverage, and they should move to other types of coverage, individual market coverage. They shouldn't be on a program that was designed as a safety net for our country's most vulnerable.
Absolutely. So then 2 more questions. How do we stop the money laundering? And what are some ideas that we can get able-bodied Americans that can go out and work? How do we get them off?
So the first thing we should do, that Congress really has a moral imperative to do, is end Obamacare's discrimination against the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So Paragon, we put out a proposal that would take that much higher federal payment rate for able-bodied working age adults and phase it down so that at the end of basically a decade, it would be the same as what states get for the same percentage for all enrollees. So we wouldn't be discriminating anymore against the most vulnerable in favor of the able-bodied. And we would move many of these able-bodied working age adults on Medicaid that have low income into the ACA exchanges where they'd qualify for a subsidy. On the money laundering, it's a complicated problem. States, unfortunately, have become pretty bad actors because of the incentives that they face. Like, they face incentives to develop these financing schemes to get as much federal money coming in as possible without any state contribution. So part of it is restricting states' ability to raise these money laundered funds. And there's proposals to do that. And actually, President Biden, when he was vice president, this issue of these provider tax scams came up, and Biden called them a scam. and said that they should be eliminated. And President Obama, in his past budget proposals, proposed reducing states' ability to sort of raise these money laundered funds. So there's been bipartisan support in the past for taking on Medicaid money laundering. My recommendation for congressional Republicans, because they're going to be, the criticism is going to come that they're trying to take away Medicaid for everybody, that they should adopt the same proposals that President Obama had to fix the Medicaid money laundering.
You think that will work if they adopt it? We'll see how that goes. So hopefully it will. Hopefully they'll be willing to do it. I have a different question from a state side, and I'm a neophyte. I'm not near the expert that you are, but I have a question. What would happen, or does the state have any skin in the game as it relates to Medicaid? Is it all coming from the federal level, or do they have to put some money towards it? And can we increase the amount they're putting towards it, or is there some formula there?
It's a great question. So it's a joint federal-state program, and the federal reimbursement for the traditional population, the federal reimbursement was based on the state per capita income. So poorer states receive a higher federal reimbursement. Richer states get half of their spending reimbursed. That's the floor. Unfortunately, what we've seen is a lot of these wealthy states like California and New York have been really good at money laundering, and so they've been able to obtain much more federal Medicaid money than some of the poorer states. Because of Obamacare and the much higher payment rate for the able-bodied working age population, and because of states' use of these money laundering tactics, the overall share that the federal government pays for Medicaid has increased significantly. And what that does is it reduces states' incentives to make sure that the spending actually provides value. And it means that a lot of Medicaid now is really corporate welfare, right? It is these big hospital systems, these big insurers that make arguments for why they need more money. And the state, because they're not responsible for the financing, because it's all federal money, they're paying these facilities very high rates. And some states are doing really obscene things with the money. So California used a money laundering scam 2 years ago. They were able to get $10 billion of free federal money. The next year, they expanded Medicaid to cover all the unauthorized immigrants in the state. And they removed the asset test for Medicaid. So literally, you can have wealth of an unlimited amount and qualify for Medicaid in the state of California.
Wow. I need to move to California. No, just kidding. One final question. We're trying to pass what's being called this one bill solution to keep in place Trump's tax cuts from his first administration, trying to keep that in place and trying to have this, what they've been calling the big, beautiful bill, this big bill. How will Medicaid play into that? And I know the big concern is that they're going to reduce the spending, and people are worried about losing their insurance. Is that a big part of this bill, or is that certainly a part of the bill?
It's a big part of the debate right now.
Okay.
I think it's unclear exactly what the components of the Medicaid reforms will be, but I think it should be a big component of the bill for a couple of reasons. One, we need to end the discrimination against the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Regardless of whether it's in a tax bill or another bill, the federal government should not be incentivizing states to provide more care for able-bodied working-age adults than kids and people with disabilities. So they should address that policy, and we're working very hard to build the case for that reform. And I think overall, the program has had such massive spending growth over the past decade, and American health outcomes haven't improved, right? So this is not like, we want a healthier population, of course, but there's a lot of things that matter for health that are outside of the medical system.
Right.
Work is very good for health. Marriage is very good for health, like being connected to your community. I think we need to change the direction of our health policy away from just getting more people with a Medicaid card in their wallet to let's create policies that are conducive to healthy behaviors and that lead to healthy outcomes for individuals.
Excellent, excellent. Well, our time is up. This has been an excellent interview. Any final words that you would like to say to our audience, and where can they find you, and where can they find a copy of your report?
Sure. So you go to our website, paragoninstitute.org, and I think now is really a time to engage. Like, members of Congress need to hear that Medicaid reform is important, and there are these significant problems with the program, such as the fact that it discriminates against the most vulnerable, and Congress needs to step up and fix these problems now before the program can no longer provide the care and the services for the people that it was meant for.
Well, thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you.
And again, you can find him at Paragon, and that website again one time?
Paragoninstitute.org.
Paragoninstitute.org. We thank you for being on our show here at Q America, and we look forward to having more conversations with you.
Great.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Somebody comes to us when they are the most vulnerable. We have an obligation to our patients to tell the truth as we learned it and to not politicize it. We are performing surgeries on these children, and the only people benefiting is the medical industrial complex, because the more surgeries that are done, the more money it is made.
Whether you're talking about an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old, I don't see how you can actually derive informed consent.
We all know that we can't be getting true informed consent.
Our medical industry has objectively been compromised in more ways than one.
You become familiar with the sound a mother makes when you tell her that her child is dead.
Find out more at whatisadoctor.org.
Welcome back to Q America. We just had a lively discussion with Dr. Brian Blase from the Paragon Health Institute. He had some sobering insights on what is happening in our Medicaid program. He discussed money laundering that's been going on for quite a while. He talked about the expansive growth of the Medicaid program that's really driven by Obamacare and some other factors. He talked about the poor quality of some of the health care that's coming out of Medicaid, and then those that are being discriminated against that should actually be receiving these Medicaid benefits. And Brian raised some good questions about what's going on here in D.C., especially as it relates to the tax bill. And so let's talk to our panel today about this discussion. We have on our panels, as always, Jonathan, an attorney with and Vice President of Government Affairs with Liberty Counsel. We have Kris Ullman from the Eagle Institute, and then we have Marty Dannenfelser, our government liaison and coalition director here at CURE. Jonathan, what are some of your key takeaways from what you heard from Brian today?
Yeah, the word discrimination is important. I think it's the first time I've heard it in this context of Medicaid, and it's worth restating what he said, that every dollar you're taking from those that deserve Medicaid or those that are the program was originally designed for, every dollar that you're given to someone else who's fraudulent or who's able-bodied, you're discriminating against the individuals that this program was made for. So I think it's worth using that word discrimination. You can, attach sort of a legal doctrine to it. If it's intentional, if it's done by states that are sort of practicing this thing, then you have a real claim where individuals that otherwise could be receiving this could bring a claim up against the state saying, no, you're fraudulently using what the federal government is sending into our state for people that don't need it, that don't deserve it. And much of what the discussion is now around Medicaid, from both sides of the aisle, even the Republicans, when they're back in their districts, have to address people where they are. And if, you do have individuals that have paid into this program that are reliant on it for a small period of time as it's designed to be, that can use it sort of as a transition fund, or disabled that really need the help, then that's a discussion that even conservatives can have and take a hold of. But the fraud and the abuse and the waste that we've seen all across this system, and the incentive that many of the blue liberal states are using to take advantage of American tax dollars is where we really need to fix it. I'm hoping the budget reconciliation process leaves the conversation there. It's a huge amount of money that the Energy and Commerce Committee is tasked with of reducing the fraud over time or reducing the waste and spending over time. So I hope the conversation really is on the vulnerable, those that need to use it. And it is worth using words like discrimination just to put it out there that these schemes are discriminating against the poor and the vulnerable.
Very, very good insight, Jonathan. And yeah, you mentioned it expensive. I think Brian said it was what? Expanding 1.2 trillion over the next. What are some key takeaways you had, Kris?
That's interesting because I try to think about this as what does a person who's getting Medicaid that doesn't deserve it think? And I think what a lot of people think is, it's just the government. I'm not actually hurting anybody, right?
Right.
And I think it's important that we remind people they're actually hurting children, vulnerable women, the disabled, when you take something that you don't deserve, that you're almost robbing them. And I think it's important to call people out on that and to say, this program is supposed to help people in tough situations. And one of the things Brian said that I loved is that it's supposed to help people get out of tough situations. Mm-hmm. And we have to look at the health of the American people, and we want to encourage them to have healthy habits. Getting married, that impacts our health. Getting a job impacts our health. We don't want to trap people in poverty, and we don't want people to rob the vulnerable because they're actually hurting themselves by becoming dependent on the government.
Absolutely.
They're actually hurting themselves. So we want a healthier America for those that are truly vulnerable, and for those who are skimming off the top thinking they're not hurting anyone. They are hurting people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Jonathan also mentioned it a couple of times about how it's discriminatory against those that's actually supposed to help, and they're hurting that population.
Right.
And so, what were some of your key takeaways, Marty?
Well, part of that is you wind up crowding out the people when you bring in all these able-bodied working people who should be either in the healthcare exchange getting private insurance, or they should be working and getting insurance through an employer. We need to have some work requirements that in this program for that able-bodied population. But it's harder and harder, he said, for people to get doctor's appointments and to get the care in a timely fashion, the people who are the low income, the pregnant women, the children, and so on. And I think the big problem here is that the states are very complicit in this, and California is probably one of the more graphic examples. He said that they've just stopped doing the accountability as far as the income eligibility. Right. They're not checking for income eligibility, that wealthy people can be signing up and getting on Medicaid, and then they get the federal government to reimburse at a large percent, up to 90%, when you're talking about these working, able-bodied people. So that's a big problem. So I think that the federal government has to step in and say, no. He did say, he had an encouraging thing, is that they're going to bring the rates together, the reimbursement rates for the state. They're proposing that they, over time, come together and be the same. Now, I don't know, even over time, perhaps the rate for the vulnerable could increase a little bit. I think the formula is mainly to bring that 90% down to whatever the state is getting. And I think you have to, you mentioned, I think during the course of that interview, this concept of skin in the game, that the states have to have skin in the game. The idea that they can just keep going to the federal government and they're working with their hospital systems and everyone else to just keep consultants, keep designing schemes to get more and more reimbursement. And if the federal government is just kind of, letting them do all this, that's a problem. But I think that they need the help of legislation. That they need Congress to step up and say this has to be fixed. These kind of schemes that he described should not be allowed to continue.
I agree. You mentioned the wealthy in California can get on it, no income requirements. Mm-hmm. We have able-bodied Americans on the program that really shouldn't be on the program, and it disincentivizes them to go to work. We have discrimination against those that actually should be receiving the benefits. What else? Is there anything else that we didn't mention or that Brian didn't mention in the interview that you think could be a part of it, or that he should have, or that we could be discussing as part of Medicaid?
Well, one of the things, the larger issue that we mention all the time when we talk about these programs is the debt that we're putting on our children and grandchildren. So it's the immediate effect of mismanagement and moving away from what the program was designed to do. But when we do that, we are burdening our children and our grandchildren. And sooner or later, we're going to, if we don't get this under control, we're going to have drastic cuts that will hurt the vulnerable. So if now we can focus on a population that needs our help, and we will have more money to continue to do that. But if we're spending it on able-bodied people and rich hospitals and Bill Gates and all the Silicon Valley bros, then we're going to end up not being able to serve the people who really need our help.
Well, you bring up a good point, because Silicon Valley is in California.
Right, it is.
and we want to serve the people that need it, because eventually there's a term that sooner or later you got to pay the piper. You got to pay for what you're using, and we're there. We're if we're not there, we're there real soon. Any point you want to add to that, Jonathan?
So, mucking up the narrative intentionally is Planned Parenthood, who I think is committing $100 billion during this reconciliation process to buy ads to say, keep Medicaid the way it is, saying that, Republicans are coming in and slashing Medicaid. We need to keep it the way it is. And the reason they want to do so is because, a huge portion of their reimbursements come through Medicaid, a huge portion of what they benefit, both in their political, legal, advocacy, and abortion schemes, come through Medicaid. And so they want to paint the picture that Republicans are coming in, slashing Medicaid, and that's going to affect the very people that we're talking about, the vulnerable. But in reality, Planned Parenthood is putting this out there in order to keep their cash cow coming. So there's a lot of avenues and a lot of narratives going around that we have to be able to navigate to see clearly, what the ultimate picture is going to be for Medicaid. The first thing is keeping the program as close to the original intent of the program. And second, stopping fraud and waste. Or you can flip the two, stop fraud and waste, and that allows the program to really serve the people you want. But we have to pay attention to where actual evil is inserting itself in the conversation. And Planned Parenthood is trying to take advantage of this narrative right now in order to keep its cash cow for its abortion factories.
Jonathan brings up a good point when he talks about Planned Parenthood profiting from Medicaid. Is there a way that we can tailor it in such a way where they can't profit from it, because they're pushing out these commercials and these narratives? From your opinion, Marty, is there something that we can do?
There is some language that has been proposed, and we have some good feedback about, from people on Capitol Hill that this may get done in a budget reconciliation bill, because that is, as Jonathan said, that is the largest single source of revenue for Planned Parenthood and other big abortion providers. Planned Parenthood over time has providing less and less in the terms of real health care, and more they're into abortion, transgender surgeries, and things of that nature. I can remember over time seeing their prenatal care going way down. We're always hearing about how they do all these mammograms and so on. That is a grossly exaggerated claim in that regard. So they're not primarily a health care provider. Their big business is abortion, and now more and more they see that this transgender thing is a profitable thing for them, so they're turning to that as well. So I think, as Jonathan pointed out, is that they are making these kind of big picture arguments. They have a lot of money, so they're just saying, the Republicans are going to hurt the poor and all those kind of things. But they're hiding behind that argument when the real thing they're trying to protect is their own source of revenue, so that they can continue to build their abortion and trans industry, if you will.
Wow, so they're making it their cash cow, really. And it shouldn't be a Republican or Democratic issue. It should be a bipartisan issue, getting it back to serving the people that it was originally intended to serve. And so we're having a really good discussion on what's going on in Medicare, or Medicaid rather, and it's a real big hot potato here in Washington as we look at continuing these tax cuts, and we'll continue our discussion as we come back to Cure America. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in our next segment.
My name is William Owens, America's poet. During the elections of 2016, I wrote a poem every day, and it's in my book, Poems for America. These poems speak to the issues of our nation like never before. Inspired by God, I know this book of poetry will be a blessing to you, your family, and your community. Visit my website, americaspoet.com.
Welcome back to Cure America. And we have just passed the 100-day mark for President Trump's second term, and the White House has been touting President Trump's accomplishment. President Trump had a special event in Michigan on the 100th day, and many media organizations had been doing their own reviews of President Trump's first 100 days. Not surprisingly, many of the so-called mainstream media outlets had a less than rosy review of President Trump's first 100 days in office. But I want to ask our panelists, what do you think was notable about President Trump's first 100 days in office? What accomplishments do you think were most notable? He did a lot. And so let's just open. Who would like to go first?
Well, I would just say a couple of things. So in his joint address to Congress, he put a picture up of America that reflects really where America is. The young African-American kid that was a cancer survivor who was bullied and is now an official Capitol Hill police or Secret Service police. You know, that's a picture of America, where America, you know, cares in its health care, where it uplifts someone that's in a struggling position, where a father is there with his son, getting lauded by, you know, the most powerful man in the nation, where they're really at peers. There was nothing more special about Donald Trump in the moment than there was that young African-American man that was there in the moment. They were on parity. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump has done in the last 100 days. He's brought to the forefront once again that equality under the law, that standard that America has held, that we really are one nation that have come from many places but are one unique people. You know, you can pick out sort of who a Frenchman is, or who an Irishman is, or who an Englishman is, and they'll tell you in their pride and their patriotic exactly who they are. But when you get to an American, it's the ability to assent to these ideals and values. And one thing that President Trump has done in the 100 days is reinterject that in common culture, that there is a pride, a nationalistic, patriotic pride that is worthy of upholding, and it is the ideals of Americans. You know, being one nation that's under God, that's in a family context, in a government context, that is standing for liberty and freedom. That is something that we haven't had in the past 4 years, and certainly in the last 100 days, we've heard more about that than we have in recent history.
Jonathan, that brings up a good point, and that's, I think that's huge. He wants us to be one American, one America, not Republican, not Democrat, rich, poor, just one America, and that's a very good point. And that was a very when he gave the that nomination, not nomination, but appointed him as a police officer, a Secret Service agent. That was huge. He's just showing us that we're all one, and he accomplished so much in that first 100 days, and that's really one of them. What is notable to you, Kris? What did he accomplish?
Well, to me and to Eagle Forum, the things that he has done that really we think are game changers is his view on women and declaring that there are two sexes, male and female, and recognizing the importance of that factual scientific statement, and also recognizing really that women are unique and different from men, and they're equal under the law, so that is great. He also moved to protect women's sports, the Title IX program, to make sure that women are competing against women. All women, whether they're good or bad, have an opportunity to play on female-only teams. And so those are two things that I think were radically different than what the Biden administration tried to do. They tried to blur the distinction, say there was nothing unique or special about women. Men can go into their prisons and sports and locker rooms and battered women's shelters, and that shows a lack of caring about women and some of the struggles that we have. So we are very, very pleased with that and think that it's a radical departure, a very brave thing for him to do, and he took it on and he has not backed down.
It's incredible that we live in a day and age that we even have to do that.
I know, and it's sad. But he was bold, and he was not bullied. And when, you know, the governor of Maine said, we're not going to protect women's sports, he said, see you in court.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
This is the law.
Absolutely. So that is a huge accomplishment, male and female. You know, I'm a pastor. In the beginning, God created them male and female. There is nothing else that you can go to before the beginning. In the beginning, male and female, and that's all there is. And that's a huge accomplishment for us as a country to be back on the right track, and as we call it, common sense.
Yes,
it's just common sense. Marty, what are some of your takeaways from this first 100 days?
Well, I think if you look at our Declaration of Independence about our inalienable rights that it speaks to there, the first among them, of course, is the right to life. And that is something that the president, in the first few days, some things on the first day, some in the first week, he restored these pro-life executive orders. He restored the idea that we are not going to be funding abortion, that we're going to protect conscience rights, that we're not going to be promoting abortion around the world, that we're going to be protecting the right of countries to have their own policies regarding protecting life, protecting the family, protecting religious liberty. By reaffirming the Geneva Consensus Declaration, for instance, and reinstating the Mexico City policy to say we're not promoting abortion around the world. So that was very big. And again, religious liberty, freedom of speech, the whole thing where the Biden administration had this whole culture, this whole apparatus, starting in the Department of Homeland Security, but fanning out through the entire government, of suppressing speech and working and pressuring news agencies and social media sites and so on to take down speech that they disapproved of. So we're seeing a much more open discussion and conversation where the American people can now speak out and have a more robust conversation. And I think that is really critical, because there's nothing more important really than, well, first protecting life, but protecting the First Amendment and the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly. They all come under that First Amendment.
Absolutely, absolutely good. And when we look at the items that you all have brought out, one of them, how do you think that plays into what he has done at the border?
Yeah, that's massive. And even, you know, they tout the numbers. It was in an ABC interview. The border crossings have stopped or reduced by 99.9%. And it's a number that is hard to fathom. But, you know, if you have 10 million border crossings and it's down to a percentage, a 0.01 percentage of that is an incredible outcome. And, you know, folks that, you know, conservatives and even, you know, Border Patrol and, you know, folks that had their eye on the border for quite a while, you honestly couldn't even fathom that much success. But all he was doing was implementing the laws that were already there. In the Michigan speech, he says, you know, Biden in the tail end of his administration was saying, well, we need legislation. We need this new legislation. Come to find out, we just needed a new president. We just needed someone to actually enforce the laws. And so his success rate is astronomical, probably in a way that even the administration thought that they can get to, but it's still amazing that they're there. Just on that last piece, it's what it does. What stopping border crossing does is slows down fentanyl, which is, you know, the #1 killer of young Americans in this country. It stops human trafficking. It stops the abuse and the rape of women that are being trafficked into this country, children that have been trafficked into this country. It stops crime. It lowers crime, lowers the ability for these, I think the guy said it earlier, unauthorized immigrants to come in and commit crime in our streets. It removes the burden on the municipalities and the cities, these so-called sanctuary cities that are harboring these criminals and these migrants, putting them in hotels, as it were. It slows the rate of what we're spending in order to keep our economy going when we're tasked with rehoming 10 million illegal immigrants. So there's so many net effects that come as a result of just enforcing a strong border policy. And I'm glad you brought that up, because it is an incredible victory that he faced in the first 100 days.
Well, it's 99.9% slowdown. And Kris, in terms of, Jonathan mentioned it helps protect women as well.
Absolutely. What was happening to women and children being trafficked across the border was really unbelievable. And the fact that the Biden administration lost tens of thousands of children where they didn't know where they were. And one of the things that is the hot story this week is that that the Trump administration is deporting American citizen children. And the truth behind that story is that a mother was here illegally. They told her she'd be leaving. She said, I want to take my 2-year-old with me. And so they said, okay, even though she was born in this country, the 2-year-old, absolutely, we're not going to rip a baby out of a mother's arms. And if they had done that, the story would have been Trump administration rips 2-year-old out of mother's arms.
Exactly right.
So they acknowledge the important role that mothers have, and they listen to the mother in this case. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about what some of these policies are doing, but we think that families need to stay together. And if the mother was here illegally and needed to be deported, then she was making the choice to take her child with her. But the Trump administration, there's a lot of pushback from the courts and from other people about what they're doing. So he's done a lot of great things, but Congress needs to help make some of these things permanent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, that's being compassionate.
Right.
She can take her child with her. You know, if we commit a crime in this country and we have a child and we get arrested, they're going to separate us from our child.
Right, that's absolutely right.
And then if someone commits a crime, they're saying if you came in here illegally, you have to go back. But if you want to take your children with you, that's compassion.
Right,
letting them take their child with them. Marty, is there anything that you want to add to that in terms of the...
I think a couple of the things that were really pervasive in the Biden administration were this whole DEI apparatus, this whole idea that, you know, one group is an oppressor, the other group is oppressed, just based on the color of their skin. And I think that was very destructive to our culture, and President Trump has put an end to all that. So I think that's also important. But the other thing that was also very pervasive was this whole climate agenda that, you know, we had to just push that whole idea. Now, I believe there is some things to be concerned about relating to the climate and so on, but the whole way that they went about doing it was just wrong-headed, and you have to just encourage more innovation. But the idea that you're going to just impose regulation upon regulation upon regulation and really hurt America much more than these other countries, because as we are being forced to do all this regulation and cut back on all these access to energy and cars of our choosing and so on, China and other countries weren't facing those kind of obstacles.
Right.
And if this is a global problem, well, their emissions are not being reduced. In fact, in many cases, we're shipping things over there. Our solar panels are being made over there, and they're using coal-fired plants to make the solar panels and so on. So it's just an absurd thing that they were doing. So I think that there's a lot more common sense and a lot of recognition that we really need our energy, especially with all this information, you know, AI and all this. They need a tremendous amount of electricity and energy. So I think we have to look at an all of the above strategy, and that was something I worked in the administration at the Department of Energy in the first time, and we had an all of the above approach, and I think that we'll be seeing them go back to that again. We're for all forms of energy, but we have to use them wisely, and I think that's what has been a really good turn in that direction.
Well, you know, energy, if we have available energy, that's actually what creates us the freedom and allows us to do a lot of what we do. Without energy, we're stuck, really.
We can even export. They've done some things with liquefied natural gas to you know, allow the export. Biden was blocking the export of liquefied natural gas. That's very important to our allies like Poland, even Ukraine and so on, that we can help these countries, that they can get this energy from us. They don't have to be dependent on Russia for their energy. Countries like Poland and Ukraine, when we open up the export of liquefied natural gas from America, that helps American jobs and American workers and brings more revenue here. But at the same time, it helps those countries to be less dependent on a country like Russia that doesn't have their best interests in mind, and to actually work with the United States and have that alliance that works for our benefit. So I think that's a very important thing that has been done in these first 100 days as well.
Wow. So we've just touched the tip of the iceberg on what President Trump has done this first 100 days. And there's a document, I believe it's on the White House's website. It's called Promises Kept. Promises made, promises kept. And so thank you for this discussion on this first 100 days. We're going to continue our discussion. We'll be back shortly here at Cure America.
Somebody comes to us when they are the most vulnerable. We have an obligation to our patients to tell the truth as we learned it and to not politicize it. We are performing surgeries on these children, and the only people benefiting is the medical industrial complex, because the more surgeries that are done, the more money it is made.
Whether you're talking about an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 14-year-old, I don't see how you can actually derive informed consent.
We all know that we can't be getting true informed consent.
Our medical industry has objectively been compromised in more ways than one.
You become familiar with the sound a mother makes when you tell her that her child is dead.
Find out more at whatisadoctor.org.
Welcome back to Q America. We've had some really good discussions today. And regardless of whether people support or oppose President Trump's agenda, and perhaps some have mixed views about it, I think just about everyone agrees that it has been a very ambitious first 100 days by President Trump and his administration. And so what I'd like to talk about now, panel, is just some big picture issues today. What are some things that are going on with your organization? What do you think about what's going on these first 100 days? And just share with us what's really important to you and what's going on in your organization.
Yeah, certainly. So for the fight for religious liberty, you had a Biden administration that would, target firstly the ability for churches to be open and to worship, and so that right restored to the American people, that never again in history we'll see a shutdown of churches in the way that we've seen. But it wasn't just the church building, it was that freedom to go out in the public square and express your faith. We had a number of cases that attempted to limit that, a number of cases that attempted to go after the organizations that are protecting free speech and religious liberty, that really at a drop of a dime, when the DOJ changes its position on certain things, allows those freedoms to be restored and allows the clients in those areas to get the remedy. So right away, even as you're fighting in the courts, you sort of walk into court, and if it's a Biden or Obama appointee, can sort of hint as to what the outcome is, versus a Trump appointee, someone that's upholding the rule of law and the standard that Trump has had for his judges. The judges on the court at SCOTUS and the judges at the lower levels are there restoring the balance of justice to everyday Americans that just want to express their faith. So in our organization, that being one of our primary fights, we saw that turn sort of right away at Trump coming back in. Just quick context, the 100 days is sort of a nebulous marker. There's nothing significant about 100 days other than, during FDR, that's when he put a ton of these New Deal stuff in. And so it's like, FDR saying, I was better than the previous president, look what I've done for 100 days. But a lot of what FDR put in place that bloated the government, we saw Trump come in and really narrow it down, firing and moving bureaucrats out of their long-held seats, cutting across USAID and the State Department all these abuses of U.S. funds, really restoring or reducing in 100 days what a bloated federal government through FDR did in 100 days. So it's incredible that marker is a contrast between what a big, bad government does and what a narrow, sort of lethal government that knows its proper role, sticks to the Constitution, and gets some of these rights restored does. So we're, on our end, we're happy to see all this happen.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about the first 100 days and what President Trump has done to reduce spending costs and just a lot of different tenets that's been going on in our country. What about over at Eagle Forum and Kris Ullman? What is going on in your world?
Well, I like to refer to this first 100 days as Trump's shock and awe. When during the Middle East wars, they talked about shock and awe. This is shock and awe. I mean, we have a list that's pages long of everything he's done. And one of the things that other than the life issue, I'd say the second most important issue to Eagle Forum is that of education. And so we've had conservative and Republican presidents talking since 1980 about getting rid of the Federal Department of Education, because we have seen no improvement in the lives of young people. And that's one thing we care very much about making sure our children are educated, that they can read, they can write, they can do math, they can be productive citizens. And what we've seen is the scores have dropped. So President Trump's effort to get rid of the Department of Education, to turn that power back over to the states, which to us means turning it back over to the parents. And parents
Absolutely.
are key to any kind of education reform. And so we're very excited about that, and we're going to be working not just in Washington, but at the state and local level to prepare those school boards and those governments and those parents to have more of the responsibility they deserve to have. It's their God-given right
Absolutely.
to control the education of their children. And that's one thing we're really excited to be working on.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, and that goes to what you said about justice, because part of that is parents having the right to raise up their own children. I agree 100%. Marty, what?
Well, of course, education is very important to cure. We have it even in our name, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. And we believe that parents should guide the upbringing of their children. So there's been a very encouraging trend in terms of school choice, education choice being supported at the state level. And we see Texas now starting to do some things, a few other states that for years hadn't really quite gotten there, even as Arizona and Florida and others in Iowa have done some great things, and many other states. But we now have an opportunity at the federal level. We are very hopeful that in this budget reconciliation bill that there is going to be federal support for school choice in the form of for people who donate to scholarship programs, getting credits and other kind of things for individual parents and to help those children. So that's a very important thing on our radar. Another thing that just happened, what we see in the area of life, is more and more the abortions are chemical abortions going. The percentage is increasing quite a bit. And we saw a report just come out in the last couple of days about the dangers of these chemical abortion pills, that we've been hearing claims that it's 0.5% of cases, but well, now we have something that it looks like it's more than 10% of cases. A study that the Ethics and Public Policy Center just released, where they went through all these insurance claims, and they showed that all these claims for people who had adverse reactions after they took abortion pills. So that is, they say, 22 times higher, the adverse effects from these abortions. So I think that's something that the federal Department of Health and Human Services is going to have to take, and especially the Food and Drug Administration that approved this mifepristone abortion pill. They're going to have to really take a look at that, at the very least, to reinstate the protections that Obama and Biden broke down. That even when Bill Clinton first allowed the abortion pill in, there were a lot more safeguards, but that had been whittled away under the others. So, but I think they have to look at it more broadly as well. And one of the things that will be very important is to not force states that have these pro-life protections to have to allow the dispensing of these pills in their states if they violate the laws in those states.
Wow. Yeah, I've read an article about that just earlier today it was 10% are adversely affected by those abortion pills. So you bring up a good point. And when we go back to education, one of the things that we're doing here at Cure America is that we're helping pastors around the country look at pro-choice, or not pro-choice, but rather education choice. We're helping them look at whether it's a micro school, a private school, a charter school. They need choices on education, and parents need to have these opportunities. So education is a big deal here at Cure.
It cuts across every demographic, cuts across racial lines, cuts across every standard of living that folks want the opportunity for their kids to be educated. Frederick Douglass most famously talking about the importance of education in building up a strong culture and certainly strong men. One of the things that Marty mentioned earlier that come back to is removing the DEI aspects in not just the federal government, but how the federal government had leaned on many of these corporations to implement DEI. The conversation hits home as an African-American male where DEI was said, hey, you need this in order to achieve that. Without us propping you up or pushing you ahead of everyone else, you will not be able to achieve. And that does two things. One, it's unfair to individuals of all races that have earned education, earned a living, and deserve to be in those roles. And second, it perpetually tells a population that without the help from the federal government or without tipping the scales in your favor, that you'll never be able to get there. And so eroding that concept from the federal government and the net effect of telling these corporations to eliminate this from your hiring and firing practices ultimately lifts everyone. It allows everyone to continue to achieve in this, equal under the law mentality. Just an example, my older brother and his 4 roommates, 4 closest friends in college, started a company. Within 2.5 to 3 years, it's valuated at $25 million. 4 African-American males, all children of Caribbean immigrants. They were told in a letter that they needed to demonstrate their DEI practices. And they're like, this has to be a joke, right? But that's really what it is, this sort of one-size-fits-all approach where you're just saying that unless you are pushing DEI or some of these other things, that you're inherently racist or inherently doing the wrong thing, on its face shows how ridiculous it is. And not to mention that these DEI programs, I think it was only 4% of the hires, as it were, actually went to African Americans. The rest were the LGBT agenda sort of shoehorning themselves through DEI efforts. So I'm glad Marty brought it up, and I think that it's relevant for CURE, it's relevant as an African American and for our audience, just to weed through the noise of that narrative saying that it was nonsense on its face, it didn't work, and we don't need it in order to reach the ultimate potential that God has given to every individual.
I agree, and one of the things that they will push, they'll bring up Frederick Douglass, but they won't bring up some of the things that he said.
That's right.
And one of the things that they ask him after Emancipation Proclamation is, what shall we do with the Negro? And he says, I get asked that question all the time, and the answer is the same: do nothing with him. Yep. Your trifling with him has done enough damage. Basically leave him alone and let him work. Just don't get in his way. Yep. And that's what these programs actually do. Absolutely. They actually get in the way.
And especially in education, there's going to be a lot of pushback from the teachers' unions saying that we're trying to destroy public education. And I would just encourage parents to say, what has this done? You have trapped our children in failing schools. There have been lawsuits with inner city kids suing their schools because they're graduating not being able to read. So what are we doing? We're freeing them from where they are trapped in failing schools. And so parents should really say, hey, you failed my kid, and I'm done with you. I need alternatives. I need choices in education.
That's right. And that's a very good point. But at the same time, there's being some pushback on them canceling these DEI programs.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that, Marty?
Well, I think it's absurd. I think DEI just pits one group against another, and it also reinforces this idea that former President Bush used to use, which was called the soft bigotry of low expectations, that we expect people of certain races to not do well, and that's discriminatory and bigoted on its face. We should have high expectations for everyone, but we should make sure that we help lift everyone up. We help make sure that everyone gets the same opportunity. We should be working 100% against discrimination of any kind, but we also should not be saying that this group, just on the color, based on the color of their skin or their gender or their identity of one kind or another, that they're being discriminated against. They need special treatment. And I think that just breeds more and more division in society when we have to bring everybody together instead.
It absolutely does. And we are a country, you mentioned it earlier, we want equal opportunity. And America is the unique place where when you come to America, you can actually become an American. I can't go to Germany and become a German.
Right.
I can't go to France and become a Frenchman. But in America, you can come from anywhere in the world and become an American. And we need to keep it open and equal, and programs like DEI are discriminatory all by themselves. So we've had some lively discussion today. We want to thank you for being with us here at CURE America. We want to thank our esteemed panel for this lively discussion, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And always, as I like to end the show, in all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. May God bless you.